Hi everyone, Nubkeks here, and today's video is our second Sanctum of Domination, the big raid of patch 9.1 preview. Today we're looking at Kel'thuzad, the second last boss of the raid, and the Eye of the Jailer, the second boss of the raid. So I'll be going through the highlights of these fights here today. If you want to see the full VOD of the raid testing, that is going to be up for patrons. I recorded it for my raid team as well, so it's kind of for my guild and for any patrons of the channel. If you missed it as well, go back and check out the highlights video for the first two bosses we got to test. The Guardians of the first ones and the Taragru. And yeah, there's more raid testing tonight. We've got 4 bosses. So I might do like two boss videos covering that over the next couple of days as well. So raid testing is in full swing at last. Anyway, let's dive in. So the first fight we're looking at is Kel'thuzad. He's back. He is back. We're not in Naxxramas, but Kel'thuzad is back. And actually, I'm quite curious to get some insight, some input from you guys in the comments, because I never raided back in vanilla, and I only raided a tiny bit in Wrath before I had to quit the game for school exams. So I never actually fought Kel'thuzad at the time. I believe it seems to me that a lot of his mechanics here are references, or they're an homage to those old fights. Really calling back to those fights in almost all the mechanics from what I can see. But if you guys who actually know the fight and how it actually plays out in terms of strategy know more, let me know, because I'm actually quite curious about that. All right, what is this fight all about then? What is going on? Well, the core of it is that you're sort of alternating between two phases. Let's look at P1 here first. In P1, you're fighting Kel'thuzad as a full raid team. You're all outside fighting him, and there's a number of different mechanics going on. So one of the mechanics puts big silent circles on a couple of players. You have to go run those out. I got that every single time, I think. Go drop those out outside of the raid group so they don't overlap anyone. The tank mechanic is actually quite cool, where he rips remnants of the tank's soul from them. So by positioning the boss in certain ways, the tanks can obviously get their souls ripped out in certain directions. Then they need to bring the boss over on top of those adds. You need to kill those soul remnants very quickly. They do casts, which you have to interrupt. If you don't interrupt the cast, it will do an AoE blast on the raid, all that sort of stuff. So you're sort of managing those soul fragments when he fractures them out. At the same time, he also can summon in these suicide bomber adds, these devoted apostles of Kel'thuzad, really drawing on the sort of necromancy vibe of the boss. But these will fixate a player, try to run them down, and then they'll try to do a cast, which will make them, they'll basically explode. They're suicide bombers. These are CCable though, right? So you have to slowly kill them off, but you can knock them back, you can stun them, CC them, fear them, whatever you want to do to stop them actually getting their cast off. At the same time, you have to deal with glacial spikes. There are 2 of these come out at the start by default, and essentially this works very like the lightning orbs on the council boss in Eternal Palace, if you remember that. Basically, the spikes are slowly dying automatically. They automatically die, but the deal is that when they die, they explode, and they do a lot of raid damage, and they put a debuff on you. On heroic difficulty, it lasts for 10 seconds, and that debuff can stack. So the idea here, pretty simply, is that you need to kill off the first spike quicker. Right, you need to stagger those explosions so the debuff doesn't stack and it doesn't just wipe out your raid. Then the mechanic that killed us the most probably is another soak mechanic. It's Frost Blast. Kel'thuzad will target a player and they'll throw a massive Frost Blast at them. It will do a huge chunk of damage. On heroic, we had about somewhere between 15 and 20 people in our raid, and it was doing about 250,000 damage, so a good chunk of damage. It splits that amongst everyone that gets hit, but the thing here that it does that actually matters is that it also roots those players for like 12 seconds afterwards. So that is where things get a bit tricky, right? You could soak it with your entire like 20-person raid group, let's say, but then you've got 20 people are going to be rooted. And if you're rooted, you can then get caught in other mechanics, which is pretty nasty. So Master spells are a pretty big deal here, or having a select group of people that can free themselves from roots, or that you could use blessing of freedoms, those sorts of things to get out, magical immunities. Yeah, it's going to be kind of interesting to figure out exactly how that one works. And then the final big mechanic that he does in P1, which you could see why it's going to be so nasty if you do get rooted, is that he'll start filling the room with these patches of ice, which grow over time. There's going to be a few safe spots. But yeah, essentially being in those icy spots will kill you extremely fast. They explode at the end, which again will kill you extremely fast. We actually were able to skip this most of the time on Heroic by phasing him fast enough the first time we were through P1. But yeah, it's very dangerous in combination with the other mechanics. And that really is sort of the deal with P1 is the mechanics overlapping. And then also what happens when you come back to P1, which I'll talk about in a second. The reason is P2. P2 is quite hard. So what you do here, Kel'thuzad dies, he's dead. But oh no, his phylactery is going to regenerate him. So what do you do? Well, what you have to do is split your raid into 2 teams. Kind of like King Rastakhan from Battle of the Zara lore, if you remember that from BFA. You need a small sort of elite team to go into the phylactery. When you're in the phylactery, and I actually did this on most of the pulls, you are fighting the remnant of Kel'thuzad. This bit was a little bit disappointing, I think. This bit was quite easy. He just does some frontal blasts that you don't stand in, some swirlies you have to avoid. And you have to bring him down by 1/3 of his HP, right? So at the start, he's at 100% health. When you bring him to 66% health, he'll start casting a spell, which is going to just kill everyone inside there. So you just have to get out. Once this is done, you get out, Kel'thuzad regenerates to full health, and you repeat, right? So you do P1 again. Then you go back into P2. This time he's at 66%, the remnant in the phylactery. Bring him to 1/3. Okay, go out again, P1 again, and then in P2 again, bring the remnant down to dead, and then you get P3, the final burn phase. What is everyone else doing in P2 that isn't inside the phylactery? Well, at this point, there's a whole bunch of new types of ads that start coming in. So you're going to have abominations come in that do a big frontal smash that has to be avoided, a frontal cone attack that you have to avoid. It will almost one-shot most players. There's going to be banshees that have a number of casts that need to be interrupted. And then there's still the little devoted ads that are going to run around and try to suicide bomb everyone. And this is kind of where we got stuck on the raid testing. It's because it does get quite hard. The reason being that when the phylactery team defeats the remnant of Kel'thuzad and they come out and go back into P1, it buffs all of the remaining ads. All of the remaining ads that the outside team are dealing with get a damage boost. They become immune to any forms of crowd control. So yeah, this is what we found quite tough. You know, if any of those banshees are still alive and they're going to continue casting, you're in for a bad time because they're now immune to control. You can't kick them, you can't stun them, knock them, anything. So you're in trouble. So it's definitely going to be managing the 2 teams. You know, outside group making sure they kill everything on time, while inside group is essentially just having enough DPS to defeat the phylactery before, again, they run out of time and Kel'thuzad just regenerates naturally. The other spicy thing then about this boss is that it looks like, as far as I'm sort of guessing here what happens, but when we beat the phylactery the first time in raid testing, when we came back out to do P1 again, it gets harder. So instead of having 2 big silent circles that you need to drop outside the room, there's now 3. Instead of having 2 glacial spikes, and you need to just space them out to make sure that they die, 10 seconds apart, not too bad. Well, now there's 3. Now there's 3, which makes it a lot harder. The big ice patches on the ground, you're not going to be able to dodge those anymore. They will be there. And it also looks like maybe more ads spawn in a bit more aggressively. I'm not entirely sure, but I think this is essentially the idea of the fight. It's doing P1 and P2 over and over again, and every time you defeat P2, every time you knock 1/3 off of the health of the remnant of Kel'thuzad and we go back into P1 gets a lot harder. The number of mechanics increase. I definitely think this is gonna be a very, very hard boss. It looks very hard. The final phase, P3, by the way, it looks like it's just a big enrage phase where you're just in P1. Again, probably all those mechanics are turned up to 11. And as far as I can tell, the P2 ads keep spawning as well. So you're doing P1, but you've got Banshees spawning in. You've got Abomination spawning in. So it's going to be pretty intense. It's going to be extremely hard. It's going to be a crazy burn at the end of this boss. Very, very tough. So what do I think of the fight and what looks good? Well, there's a lot of ad management in this fight. There's an awful lot of ad management. So specs that are going to do well at that, I think are going to shine, especially because these ads are quite split up, right? You've got the fixate ads running around all over the place. The glacial spikes are split apart. I mean, Warlock definitely stands out to me as being a class that's going to be really, really good here. Warlock is going to be great, like Destruction Warlock, Affliction Warlock, you know, 2-target cleave with Destruction is going to be awesome, right? You need to push Kel'Thuzad. Oh, but we also need to kill this Glacial Spike. Hey, slap a Havoc on it, kill the two at once. There's a bunch of ads spawned in, drop in your Infernal and start blasting AoE. That sort of stuff seems like it could be really strong. I think on our raid comp, we actually had Frost DK doing super well. They were doing just awesome AoE cleave damage with Breath of Sindragosa. We actually had a Feral Druid was just blitzing the boss in single target as well. They were doing loads of damage. Then P2, right? P2 with the Phylactery phase, the downstairs phase, that really emphasizes single target damage and burst damage. So specs that are going to have single target CDs up for every time they go down there are going to be good, and just single target nuking is going to be good. So Shadow Priest I was playing was pretty good at that, pretty terrible at the upstairs phase with how Shadow Priest works in Shadowlands compared to BFA. Would have been amazing in BFA. This would have been the best fight. Alas, it is not to be. But yeah, Fire Mages were really good for just that big combust, nuke that ad down in the downstairs phase ASAP. I'd say like Assassination Rogue coming in with Vendetta could absolutely rip through it. Yeah, anything that does good single target burst is gonna sort of excel in that phase. So there you go, that's Kel'Thuzad. I will be honest here though, and I will say that out of all these 4 bosses, this is actually the boss that I probably enjoyed the least. Yeah, I actually think I enjoyed this one the least. I much prefer the next boss we're going to look at in today's video, the Eye of the Jailer. I found was a lot more fun. But I don't know. Again, I think this boss certainly looks like he's going to be very hard. This is going to be a very, very, very difficult boss. So if that's your favorite thing about raiding, just really hard bosses, then this looks like it is going to be that, absolutely 100%. I also feel that, you know, a lot of the enjoyment will come from if you raided Kel'Thuzad in the past, right? And kind of seeing a more modern take on it, I think it'd be pretty enjoyable, right? Getting to rate that at the current, you know, Mythic raid difficulty level, if that's your thing, that could be pretty awesome. I will say for me, not really having that nostalgia factor at all, I don't know, I just found this boss a little less interesting than the other ones in the raid that are doing kind of, you know, crazy stuff and there's fun environmental things. This is a much more, I'd say a much more standard traditional boss fight. You know, you're just fighting in a room, there's stuff to dodge, there's ads to kill, but, you know, there's nothing too exciting environmentally going on, which tends to be the stuff that I really love, you know, like Operator Thogar in Blackrock Foundry or Hans and Franz. That's probably my favorite raid ever. Just really cool environmental stuff, or some of the things that happen in the next boss we'll look at. Yeah. All right, guys, next up, we're looking at the second boss of the raid, the Eye of the Jailer. And we were actually able to get this boss to the point where it would have died. So we actually saw the entire fight. And for me, actually, this was my preferred fight of the two. I really, really like this one. I thought this was really cool, really fun, and a really nice second boss. The first thing that's really notable is I love the boss arena here. It's so cool. It's like you are up on top of the tower. You're fighting like on the ramparts of this massive tower, and the eye is kind of floating off the side and just sort of bombarding you with these orbital effects, which I thought was, yeah, really, really, really cool. In terms of the actual fight then, funny enough, I think they did this on purpose. It's actually the same sort of idea as Kel'Thuzad, where it alternates between P1 and P2 3 times. So in P1, you're fighting the boss in the middle of the platform, and he does, you know, traditional eye boss type attack. So he does a beam that chains between players. The tank mechanic, I think, is kind of nice, where it will chain towards the different players based off of the damage that the tank actually took. So if your tank uses active mitigation properly, they use a defensive CD, then when it changes to the rest of the players, it will do less damage to them based off of how well the tank mitigated it. So that's pretty cool. The first big fun mechanic, though, of P1 is the Stygian Abductor. You know this from the Maw, right? That's where you know the Eye of the Jailer from. Oh no, what a pain. But they're more fun in this boss fight. The way that it works is that the Abductor is going to attempt to chain players and pull them off the edge of the tower, where they will fall thousands of feet to their death and destruction. Oh no, oh dear. How do you deal with it? Well, the way you deal with it is that you have as many players as possible can go in and help the player that is going to be chained, and then they will all get chained as well. But the Stygian Abductor is only so strong, right? So the more people that are chained, the weaker the pull is going to be by the abductor. And then you can all run against the chains. You can pull on the chains collectively by running the other way, which can actually then overcome the abductor, and it pulls them onto the platform instead, where you can then tank and spank them and just blow them up. So once you know how to handle this mechanic, it's actually not that bad at all, but it's just really fun and satisfying, right? The first few times on testing when we got this, you know, maybe only 3 or 4 people would have it, and the abductor is just pulling you off the platform. You're struggling for your life. You really feel like you're just being tugged off and you can't fight it off. But then when the whole raid helps and the whole raid pulls against it, it's suddenly super easy. It just has a really tactile feeling that I can't quite explain unless you actually play it. But yeah, just that feeling of resistance compared to the whole raid working together, and just, it's like nothing's there. It's like just absolutely casually just walk backwards, bam, and you all pull the abductor onto the platform by working together. It's just a really fun thing, right? Not that hard, but just a really cool thematic mechanic that kind of goes like, yeah, we are in a raid team. We are a raid group and we just did this together. That was kind of cool. Another mechanic which is sort of a reference to the Eye of the Jailer as it was in the Maw, which, by the way, because it's a raid boss, it's not in the Maw anymore, so you don't have to worry about that. Check out my Maw preview video to find out more. The other mechanic it does, it will do these bombardments, big swirlies, I think 3 of them for our raid size, would appear on the ground. If you got hit by that swirly, it was kind of like the orbital bombardment that happened at, what was it? Eye of the Jailer level 2, maybe in the Maw, where you'd have all these chains locking you down. This time there's going to be 3 ghosts, so you have to run to each of your 3 ghosts to get rid of it. So it's really bad, like do not get hit by that swirly. It's a real hassle. I think each ghost increases your shadow damage taken by 20%. So that's 60% more damage taken at max stacks, which is obviously kind of rough because I think most of the damage in this fight is going to be shadow damage. Then the other really fun mechanic in this phase is the, I think it's the Eye of Annihilation. Really cool. Basically, the Eye of the Jailer will fire out this giant beam and just sweep it across the entire platform. If you're touched by the beam, you'll die. I tried to soul shape through it once with my soul shape blink. I died. It's basically the big death beam. So how the heck do you get out of it? Well, it's just, again, simple enough, but quite fun, is that at the edge of the tower, at the edge of the platform, there's a pile of chains. So you run over Indiana Jones style, and you can essentially just hook and swing across on the chains from one side of the platform to the other. So you just swing in behind the boss to avoid it. It's really fun. It's just a whole lot of fun. Again, it's not too difficult. You know, just go over, chain across, you're gonna be fine. But it's just really cool, to be honest. It's just cool. Then going into P2, what's the deal with this? Well, the Jailer is going to shed off 2 of its 6 accompanying eyes. So you have to fight these eyes. These eyes have to be tanked separately. If they go too close together, I think they like enrage, take less damage or something. So they have to be tanked apart. And you also need to kill them both at the same time, right? If you kill one earlier than the other one, it will start pulsing raid-wide damage. And also during this phase, there's going to be pools dropping beneath all the players. So essentially you have to come and you have to tank these at the back of the room, away from the edge. You're just dropping these pools, and these pools are permanent. These last forever. For the rest of the fight, they will always be there. So it's trying to manage your space, because you have to go through 3 of these phase 2s, right? You have to go through 3 sets of eyes. The Eye of the Jailer has 6 of these accompanying eyes, and you have to do 3 sets of 2. And that, guys, is actually basically the whole fight. That's basically it. So it's relatively simple, but what I really, really like about this is that while it's not too hard, there are a bunch of mechanics that are cool, they stand out, and they're just kind of awesome. They are just kind of awesome. I really like pulling the Stygian Abductor onto the platform, working together with those chains. I like, you know, chaining across the gap to avoid the annihilating glare. Again, it's not that hard, but it's just badass. It feels really epic. Just the scale. I think just the scale of the room, the scale of this raid, the Sanctum of Domination, it just feels epic, which is what you want. I think that's just cool. And then again, I like P2. I enjoy P2. It's not too crazy difficult, but you know, you are managing your space. You have to think about that. Where are you baiting the pools? Make sure that you're not going to cover the middle of the room, and then, hey, you might have to run through that to get away from the chains. You might have to run away from that to stop the I-beam chaining, or to escape from the giant annihilation laser. You know, you do have to think about that a little bit. It's not crazy hard by any means, but it is something you have to think about, and you can see those pools building up over the course of the fight. And you can see that you are baiting them well, and you know, it's rewarding. It is rewarding, and I think that's awesome. But yeah, there you go, guys. They're the 2 bosses we got to see on the test realm last night. Let me know what you think of them. Let me know what you think. Again, for me, I personally preferred Eye of the Jailer. I thought it was a really, really fun second boss of a raid. I thought it was a great second boss of a raid. Yeah, it was just cool. I just really liked it. Kel'thuzad, I was honestly not that much of a fan of. I actually saw Limit Max, I think, tweeted out that he thinks Kel'thuzad's going to be amazing. So, I mean, we had totally different takes on it there. I'd be very interested to hear what he saw. He obviously will have seen more of the fight with his guild than we saw, so he would know more. So I hope that he's right, and that Kel'thuzad actually does turn out to be like that. It's certainly a more difficult fight, but much like the first testing session in in Sanctum of Domination, I've actually been super impressed. I've been super impressed. I've really enjoyed these bosses. I'm getting very hyped. I think this could be a really good raid. Yeah, my biggest takeaway, I think, from this raid testing session, especially seeing more of and doing some exploring after raid testing ended, because the server crashed like half an hour before it ended, and I think our raid team was just like, yeah, you know what? I mean, we basically got this boss to where it was dead. We figured out the mechanics. Like, we're good after half an hour. We're good. We're done. We can just, whatever, go chill. I got to explore the Sanctum a little bit. And for me, it's just the scale of the Sanctum of Domination. It's big. And that actually feels quite different from Castle Nathria, which, you know, feels, you know, it's still big and it's still fantasy and fantastical, but it's a bit more realistic to something you might see in real life, in the real world. Whereas the Sanctum of Domination, just the scale of it, which really was exemplified by that Eye of the Jailer fight, it's just on another level. Like, you really feel, you're like, oh wow, I'm in a fortress. Like, this is a massive fantasy fortress. This is insane. It's really cool. So that's sort of my takeaway. It was kind of an interesting thing, not something I expected. Guys, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Again, I will have the next bosses coming up tonight. I'll have those up tomorrow and the next day, most likely. And of course, I'll put up all the raid testing footage on my Patreon as well, if you want to see the full raw footage for whatever reason. Thank you for watching, though. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Oh wow, he's just killing everyone. Oh, they want to die.
Yeah.
Don't want to kill them. Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I guess they want to.
Yeah.